Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptid Creator Corner, brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Hey Comics fam, I wanted to tell you about this amazing new Kickstarter project funding soon from my friend David Rodriguez. It follows the adventures of 3 young heroes chosen by mystical gems of power and trained in a secret program called Guardian Battle Force Mexico. The world's first Aztec Super Sentai control 3 unique guardian spirits, the jaguar, the hummingbird, and the unicorn, to defend the children from an ancient evil that haunts their nightmares. I got an advanced look at this and it blew me away. Artist Stefano Simeone is top-level talent, having worked on Mega Man, Radiant Black, and Star Wars, among other things. And this is a perfect fit for a story that has something of a cross between so many of the team-oriented 80s cartoons I love. I interviewed David a couple years ago for his graphic novel, Finding Gossamer, and I've been looking forward to seeing what he does next. This has the look of something that will definitely get picked up by a major publisher, so get in on the ground floor. Head over to Kickstarter and search for Battle Mex to sign up for notifications when this thing goes live. I've also dropped a link in the show notes to make it easy for you. It will be available in both English and Spanish, which I absolutely love. This podcast has always been about promoting diversity and inclusion in comics, and it makes it so much more accessible to a wider community of new, younger readers. Don't miss it. This is Byron O'Neill, your host for today's episode of the Cryptic Creator Corner. Today I'm joined by someone who, if his name doesn't immediately leap to mind, I damn near guarantee you've read something he's worked on. For over 15 years, he has helped shape the voices and vision of what is arguably the most recognized comics imprint of all time, DC's Vertigo, until he transitioned to working as a freelance editor for Image, Comixology, DC, First Second Books, and TKO, to name a few. He's worked with the biggest heavy hitters in the business for 2 decades and is now turning his attention to helping launch the new comics publishing company DSTLRY as its founding editor. Will Dennis, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for that intro.
Not too bad. I hope.
Pretty impressive, I know, I have to say.
Good. That's what we're going for. Well, I've gotten in a habit of checking to see, now who the editor is on everything I pick up, and your name keeps popping up. I'm going back and filling in some gaps from back when. So most recently, that was Greek Street, which I got to say it was pretty excellent. Yeah.
Whoa, that's a blast from the past. Peter Milligan, the most underrated comic book writer of the last 35 years, probably.
Yeah, his stuff's great. That was a huge swing. I really, really enjoyed it conceptually. I was like, why didn't they make a TV series about this? But I guess that was before the big IP grab.
Yeah, and the Vertigo being part of Warner Brothers at the time. Yeah, you could ask that about so much of the stuff. It's like, where are the shows for 100 Bullets? A lot of other stuff that seems pretty obviously translatable, but yeah, those wheels ground pretty slow, particularly in those days. But yeah, I haven't heard that one in a while. I'd love Peter's work for like years and years and years, and then finally had reached out to him to be like, hey, do you want to try to do some stuff? And he pitched a bunch of things. I didn't think we ended up doing 2 or 3 things right in a row there. There was a one called The Names, and then there was another one that they ended up finishing, I think at Image or something, that was kind of towards the end of my run at Vertigo. But Greek Street was a great one. Definitely.
Yeah. I enjoyed that one. Well, yeah, let's jump into DSTLRY. There's not too much coverage out there right now, which is part of why I wanted to have you on for a chat. There's some Comixology roots with David Steinberger and Chip Mosier kind of having pivotal roles as CEO and CCO respectively. And okay, so you'll have to forgive me here, but I've been reading comics since 1979, and we've both seen a lot of new publishing companies enter and exit the scene. So what was missing in the medium that led to the idea that kind of would become DSTLRY?
I think it's this combination of a lot of stuff. One, it's like where we all were at in our careers in terms of the work that we've done, the people that we knew, the people we thought we could bring on board. There was this sort of combination of somebody who really intimately knows the digital space and basically created like the digital reading experience as most people know it, in David's work at Comixology and, all that stuff. And then you also have this push on the other side to be creating these kind of, artifacts. Like, that sounds kind of hokey, but you know what I mean? Like comics that like of a higher quality, bigger size, something different format wise, something that would sort of feed into, a lot of the collectible, stuff that has, really in the recent years kind of, reinvigorated a lot of the industry, and for good or bad, some of it. Yeah, and it was just that sort of thing. Like, can you, and then can you get creators of the certain quality, but can you also then give them participation in the company and ownership of their IP? And there isn't a lot of that, the monkey business. I mean, even being at a place like Vertigo, I mean, it was it was creator owned as much as it could be. And like basically the Vertigo contract is the same contract that all these other smaller publishers have, you know, copied over the years,
Yeah.
in terms of it being like a shared ownership and that sort of thing. And so, so it's not quite as creator owned as like an Image is, where they don't, take any kind of interest or stake in the IP, beyond the publishing stuff, obviously. But so yeah, I was like trying to figure out like what's the sweet spot there, like, where you're taking a risk as a publisher, so you want a certain amount of participation, but you also don't want to be dissuading people, because for a long time, particularly towards my end of run at Vertigo, that was the hardest thing for us to overcome, right? Like once Image in the early, like maybe 2010, 11, 12 started to really pick up steam, and we couldn't really compete with that at Vertigo in terms of, well, we're doing the same kind of projects, these cool genre creator owned things, but they don't want any stake, or they don't take any stake in the media stuff.
Right.
So that was the deal breaker on so many things. I mean, there's a number of projects that ended up at Image that, were on my desk originally, and then, like you just couldn't get it sorted out because, why they didn't
Right.
want to have to share anything with DC or Vertigo, which,
Sure.
is fine if you have an alternative.
Yeah.
Then, I totally support that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I
so I
mean,
think Distillery, it was to try to figure out like all of those moving parts, that would sort of something that collectors and the print industry would like, and but also this digital, trying to figure out, is this digital comic reading experience, and but also like this digital marketplace, and then
right.
trying to treat people in a certain way, creators fair, in a certain way, a fair, like a with the equity stakes and all the rest of it that they have. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's like a work in progress, obviously, but so far it feels like so far so good.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, I think, novel foundational approach that I haven't seen before, which kind of
Hmm.
hopefully will insulate the company from some of the pitfalls of navigating the indie comics publishing space. Because you brought in the expertise from all these varied entertainment fields. You have a movie producer, a video game
Hmm.
executive, tech
Hmm.
strategist, even a media giant with Kodansha. Like which sort of
Right.
blew my mind because I saw them on a Premier League dasher recently. So like
Hmm.
that's a big deal to have that much reach. Um, so I know you've been
For
doing,
sure.
all that freelance work for Comixology. So you've got that established connection. Was it in bringing you on board? Was it simple as like, hey, Will, we've got this new thing. You want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I mean, I think it's
Okay.
like, I mean, my philosophy has always been like, if I hire really good people, then, it makes my job a lot easier. It makes my life a
Yeah.
lot easier in general.
Yeah.
Like, it comes with its own issues at times if you're working with people at a certain, part of the food chain or whatever, the approach is different. But yeah, if you hire really good people to do their stuff, like I don't need to be meddling in the thing. And I think David and Chip definitely sort of share the same philosophy. It's like they know, I mean, Chip is great at the promotional stuff and dealing with the retailers and kind of having his finger on pulse of a lot of that sort of thing. And then David is, as you say, like more of the tech kind of entrepreneur, fundraising, understanding how to, raise money and get it from all these different pots and different parts of different industries that, you may end up leaning on or leveraging later for stuff. And so, but that kind of leaves out the editorial, side. So it's like, all right, well, then why don't we just go find the person that we really trust, who has a track record and works with all the people that we kind of admire and a lot of the people that we're bringing in. So yeah, it seemed like a real obvious fit.
Yeah. So what does your role look like on kind of a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it's a little there was some issues, like not issues, but like trying to define it because I'm not the editor in chief, right? So and that was a bit by choice on my part, I think. Just meaning that I could still keep like a lot of the other freelance stuff that I've been doing.
Yeah.
Keep it, like I'm not exclusive to Distillery per se. I
Right.
still have, I don't know, probably a half a dozen or more books at the moment at at Image, at other places, still finishing up stuff at Comixology, doing, bits and bobs for other smaller companies here and there.
Yeah.
So in that respect, like I'm not really operating as an editor in chief. Like it's more of a consultant role kind of on the bigger picture side. And then, but then I'm attached individually to certain projects, right? So like Gone, the Jock book, or Somna, the Becky Cloonan and Lisa, or Tula Lote book that we're just wrapping up now. And I think they've announced some of the other ones like the White Boat, the Scott Snyder, Francesco Francavilla book, and Blood Brothers Mother. That's Riso and Azarello, who I
Yeah.
worked with for years on 100 Bullets. So yeah, I'm working with them individually on those projects in just the same traditional kind of editorial way that I normally would. But then
Okay.
I also, I'm in David and Chip and the rest of the team there. Like I have a lot of input or help on whatever sort of stuff, like either is it people that they're talking to, is it, previews stuff, is it marketing kind of stuff. But I don't know. I try not to, like, I try to stay in my own lane as much as I can, I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like they've done a great job of hiring, people who do social media, people who do kind of the marketing, and people who do the production. Like I've had a lot of success in my career taking over projects from other people, like 100 Bullets or Why the Last Man were books that I inherited essentially. And I think the smart thing that I did was kind of understanding what I was good at and then not feeling the need to put my fingerprints all over every single thing,
Yeah.
which is not, you can't say that of a lot of, necessarily all the people, other editors that I work with over the years, other, you know, there is a tendency, you see it all the time. You see it in sports, you see it in entertainment, you hire a new person in and then suddenly they gotta, like, everything's gotta change. They gotta have their fingerprint, like I definitely do not subscribe to that as a philosophy. So, it's like, I'm not going to get in there and just be like, you should be doing the TikTok videos this way. Cause I don't know anything about making TikTok videos, but I do know a lot about making like kind of high quality, cool genre comics that hopefully will, stand the test of time.
Well,
So
kind of
yeah, so
as
it's an interesting role, like I don't, even other projects and other people, like they might talk to me about, oh, we're talking to so and so, but they're, or they may even send me pitches, they might be getting in from new writers and stuff. But like, say for instance, like something like Blasphemous, which just premiered from Mirka and Dolfo, like they're not sending me the scripts for that, like
yeah.
I'm not reading the scripts, I'm not seeing the stuff. I may see this. I mean, they do a nice job of trying to create almost the vibe of like a virtual studio, like there's WhatsApp threads and other kind of communication stuff with everybody who's in the company,
Yeah.
creatively and internally. And so there's a lot of sharing of, oh, this thing just came in, this cover just came in, or this press release is going to go out, or that kind of stuff. So at least you get to feel, everybody feel, because being freelancers is very isolating, right? Like they're very kind of off on
Yeah.
an island.
Yeah.
So they have done a great job, I think, of trying to at least keep people in a loop. And there's a lot of chatter back and forth. And some people don't participate at all, and some people participate a lot. But it is kind of a nice little. It's nice to have these outlets for people to sort of see stuff. But anyway, long story short, like I'm not. I don't like. I'm not approving everything that goes out the door, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's kind
Okay.
of an
I mean,
interesting, like, little spot to be in there,
yeah, it feels very fluid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think if I'm not mistaken, Greg Lockhart is working as he's doing some editing stuff too. Is that
Yeah, I mean, he helped me on the Devil's Cut for sure. And
okay?
he might be, he works a lot with James on his stuff for Image and like his Substack and everything.
Yeah.
So he may be, doing some of that, and working on some of the books with James. Like I'm not working on any of James's books. Like he's got his whole Tiny Onion empire that, sort of like they're packaging and bringing it all in kind of that way. So yeah, I assume Greg is and other people like that,
Yeah. Is there an ethos, like an overarching one that that you're kind of bringing in? But I to some extent, I'm just kind of hearing you take an air traffic control, for lack of a
hmm
better way of
hmm
putting it,
hmm
kind of role where you let the people that you hire that are good, you hire the right people, you let them do their gig. Um, so I mean, are you imparting, kind of any imprint into you feel like into the DNA, or is it just okay, I'm trying to make and put out the best product,
hmm
here,
hmm
and that's my role.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always been my role. It's kind of, I mean, the real thing, the success I've had, I feel like, is mostly based around um, it's communication skills. It's like my interpersonal skills, but it's also knowing what people need, right? It's like that everyone's different. I mean, one of the mistakes a lot of companies make, a lot of, places like a lot of editorial, and I'll say, Marvel editorial, DC editorial, those sorts of things. And they were making it while I was still there. And I think they're still making a lot of these mistakes. And you can see it in the end product, really, is that, when the only tool you have is a hammer, like everything looks like a nail, right? So
Yeah,
it's just like you're trying, and we used to have this fight at DC all the time, like even the marketing and salespeople, like, selling Batman versus selling Greek Street, like they're two very different things. But, there was one department, there was one group of people, there was one sales team, and I used to have huge fights with like, can we sit with these people? Can we come up with like talking points? Can we just meet the handful of retailers that we know are buying all of this kind of mature creator owned stuff? They're not the same ones who are buying 500 copies of Teen Titans, So
yeah,
it was like trying to find that. So I feel like, that's been a fight for me forever that I've been having, and, much less so at Distillery, obviously, but because they really kind of understand, you know, even within the company, the different books are selling to different audiences, they're selling to different retailers, they're being selling them in different ways, that sort of stuff. But yeah, even editorially speaking, it's like for me, it's just been like knowing what the person needs and try to helping them with that. Some people really want like a lot of input and a lot of back and forth and a lot of, and there's a lot of hair pulling and sort of, that sort of thing. I mean, someone like a Scott Snyder, like Scott is, he's doing like work at a super high level and he's like, top of the food chain and everything. But, he's definitely, and he's been doing it now a long time, but he's still like, he likes a lot of back and forth. He likes a lot of, getting on the phone and talking it over, and he's
yeah,
just talking and I'm just listening kind of stuff. Whereas, I can work with guys like a Jeff Lemire or, even like Azzarello, like they're just sending stuff in, and then and it's fully done. And, we might have a current conversation. We might not, it's just like, I mean, we'll have a conversation, but like, there's not a lot of, like by the time you get it, it seems very fully formed and they're not looking for a ton of input and they're
right,
not looking for a ton of feedback necessarily, they're not opposed to it, but it's also, it's just a different thing,
yeah,
and that's true of artists too. There's artists that want to send stuff in, you want to go through every page or panel, and then there's other people that like you get the sense that they don't really need that or want that, and then it's like trying to, that doesn't mean you're not making changes or asking for stuff. Like I'm always willing to ask like anybody for something if I feel it's necessary. But but even that, I try to limit that kind of stuff as much as I can. I mean, my own ethos in that respect is just kind of always this arbitrage of like what is asking for this change get me versus what is asking for this change lose me.
hmm,
And I don't think I've known a lot of editors and worked with a lot of editors over the years, and I don't think that's universal. I
yeah,
think that there's a philosophy that definitely exists that if I'm not asking for changes, then I'm not doing my job. Which is fair, and if that's the way you want it. But I've never really subscribed to that. Like I've never approached it that way, which I think then is reflected, egotistically or whatever in the relationships that I've maintained over the years.
yeah,
That I'm still working with people that I've worked with for 20 some years and working at a really high level, and they're still doing what I think is their best work, for me or with me. Maybe even it's even saying like doing it with me as opposed to for me, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of editors fall into this trap of, that's what editing is. It's asking for changes. It's putting your fingerprints on stuff. It's, in a lot of cases, sadly, it's like putting your boot on somebody's neck to get them to do it, or threatening them or firing them. I mean, I can count on one hand the people I've fired in my whole career. And in 9 times out of 10, and I don't even think there's been 10 people, I've had people come to me years later and be like, you know what, like that was the right thing to do. Like I wasn't ready, or I was messing it up, or like I would have fired me too. Kind of like I've had that conversation over the years,
Sure. Yeah.
Where I think a lot of other editors in different positions, different places, like that's their go-to,
Yeah.
move is like, I'm going to replace you, or there's someone else that can do it. Like, I don't think fear is generally a great motivator for like creative endeavors,
Certainly not when you're trying to make a career out of doing what you're doing. Yeah. Like you don't want to be the Axeman and that's your reputation. That is not a
Yeah,
good
no,
place to
right.
be.
Or just the person that's constantly, like the churn. And you see it. I mean, if you go look at other kinds of editors who've been doing it a long time, they might maintain certain relationships, but, it doesn't necessarily, they go through these phases where they're working with a handful of people and then they're working with a new handful of people. And you start to realize like, oh, that last handful of people, like just had had enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well,
So,
we're in a bit of a comics renaissance right now. But I feel a lot of, apprehension in the comics creative community. I guess there's a lot of doubt as to where the industry is headed. So kind of in your opinion as an industry veteran, how do we right the ship? How do we build that foundation and move forward, I guess, and make people feel a little bit more positive about things?
yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't, I wish I had a good answer. I mean, some of it I don't really is a little baffling to me from the standpoint of it's a bit even like the greater culture, particularly in the United States, where it's like there's this sort of sense of, gloom and sort of things. But when you look at a lot of the traditional indicators of where things would be positive, whether it's with like jobs, the employment rates or inflation coming down or other things like that, like we should be in a more positive mind state, like on a traditional basis, it feels like, than we are. And the
Mhm.
same with comics in a lot of ways. It's sort of like there's all this great material and there's been this like renaissance and all this incredible stuff. Yet the storyline still tends to be, oh, like it's terrible, where everyone's going out of business, the sales are down, all these sorts of things. And it's like, and if you really drill down into a lot of the numbers and stuff, like that's not necessarily the case. And but I don't know how you turn like the mood of everything, around, because there's a sort of an intellectual side to that, but then there's also like an emotional side to that. So, I mean, the only thing I would say about it, and I figure probably told the story before in other places, but comics and I think comics specifically, in my experience, like based on other places and other industries I've worked in, we do have this propensity for like the sky is falling kind of,
Yeah.
like I think people have been predicting the death of comics since the first person drew a comic, probably, I mean,
Yeah.
even to the fact like, so I started in Vertigo in October of 1999, and I had been working in the film industry in New York City for like 6 or 7 years before that.
Okay.
Maybe not quite that long, 5 or 6 years, and making like a lot of money. And it's film, so everything is amped up. But it was also horrible, right? It was like people were horrible. The industry was. I mean, it was an exciting time. It was the '90s. It was like independent films blowing up at Sundance, and everybody's going from rags to riches overnight, and but like it wasn't a pleasant place to work, just in terms of the way people treated each other. And so when I went to work in DC in October, I took a huge pay cut, like maybe I don't know, 75% pay cut or something, like something really significant.
Yeah.
But I was just like, I loved comics and I loved comics my whole life, and it felt like something that I could, maybe be good at in a career. But literally 2 weeks after I started DC, they had this all hands meeting, and Paul Levitz and Jeanette Kahn, who was then the president, like stood up and basically read off this list of, here's all the books that are getting canceled. Here's all the stuff. We don't know how long we're going to be able to continue at this rate. We don't know any of this. And it was like, oh my God. Like, I don't know if I can swear on your podcast, but
you can.
it was just
go
like,
for it.
It was just like, what? I went home and talked to my wife and sitting at the kitchen table, and I was like, what the hell, did I just do? And she's saying to me like, yeah, what the hell did you just do? And it was just like the worst thing you could imagine, to hear. And I come out of the meeting looking at Karen Berger and Shelley Bond and stuff who'd hired me and being like, like, what did you guys let me walk into here? And that was in October of 1999, so it's like, here we are, like literally 25 years later, and we're sort of all freaking out about, oh my God, what's going to happen, so I don't know. So I wish I had the answer for why people feel this way, but I also, there is this, like, I don't know, maybe this time it's different, right? I mean, but everybody thinks that always, I mean, there's they found graffiti on ancient Mesopotamian ruins that say, kids these days have it so easy, they don't understand how hard it was for me, so it's like some of this stuff is, it's always been that, but yeah, because I think if you really look at the good stuff that's happening, I mean, there is so much more opportunity for people. People that traditionally haven't had opportunities, I think, finding more space for opportunities. There's more. Even I say this to people when they're talking about breaking into the industry. It's like, when I first started, I mean, you really did have to kind of convince Vertigo or DC or Marvel to hire you to be in the industry.
Right.
Even though there were small publishers, at the time, Dark Horse, Image, other places like that, like it still felt like, you had to kind of have these gatekeepers, like myself included, anoint you that you were in the industry. But it's like, you don't really need that anymore. It's like, you have an idea and you have people and somebody who can draw it and you can raise the funds on Kickstarter and do it. Like, hooray, you're in the industry, welcome aboard, So it's like, there's that sense of like, when everything is so flattened out and horizontal now, that it's some of those old mindsets still persist. I'm always surprised when I meet people at shows and they ask about, and they're doing 10 different weird things. And then they're talking to me about, how do I break in? I'm like, you're in. Like, I don't know. What do you want me to say? Like, I mean, if you're talking about how to get a job at Marvel or DC, well, yeah, I mean, that's a different argument, a different discussion. But some of it is just there is this very weird, pervasive, like, imposter syndrome, lack of self-confidence, and that permeates the entire industry. It's not even just the people within it. It's the way we even look at comics and the way we've traditionally looked at comics, and, that we're the sort of redheaded stepchild of, publishing and everything, and it's certainly changed in the years that I've been in the business. It's gotten a lot more, it's certainly gotten a lot more mainstream, obviously, with the rise of TV and movies and everything. But yeah, there was definitely a time early on in my career when people would ask me what I would do. And it was like, I work in publishing, and it was just this weird sort of, you had this tick almost of like not saying that you edited comic books or something, which seems, I mean, it seems embarrassing. It's kind of stupid in hindsight, but it is sort of it is very like in the DNA of our industry that we have this, kind of lack of self-esteem almost, for better or worse.
Yeah, I mean, that's societally pervasive. I mean, I remember from the music industry, I try to tell people what I do, and they're like, "Okay, what?" And you say roadie, and immediately they get it, but at the same time, it calls to mind so many of these other, preconceived things about it. Yeah.
Right. Oh yeah, no, I had no idea. When you said you worked in the music industry, and then when you say you're a roadie, like in my own mind, it's like, oh wait, those are two totally different things.
Exactly.
Which is not fair at all. And it's like, and I know from my own experience, like you say, like, yeah, what a comic book editor does, or at least what I think they do, versus what, probably people, I always have people like, oh, so you correct the typos and the grammar and stuff. And I'm like, well, yeah, but that's, 2% of what I do, it's not, not really the bulk of it, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, I spent like 15 years really working with the biggest names in music, and all these varied roles: stage manager, production manager, down to like the guy driving the catering truck at times when my leg was
Yeah.
broken. And I'm kind of curious about parallels between that and what you do. Music. I found anyway that the big thing was putting the work first, and then
Hmm.
frankly just having the balls to tell famous people what to do when it came to that. And I'm kind of
Right.
assuming comics people are better behaved than
For
musicians, but that's a
sure.
low bar. Um, I've
Yeah.
spoken
Yeah.
spoken to a few editors at bigger publishing companies, and it seems like that that, and you were talking about the management styles are very different. It feels like than comics, but how do you do that? How do you keep the big guns in line, or is it just a matter of, okay, Brian doesn't want that much, whereas I know I need to communicate daily with Scott, let's just say.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you are right. I mean, we jokingly had this adage for years that there are no comic book rock stars. I mean,
Yeah.
I used to say to people all the time, there's no such thing as a comic book rock star, and there's no such thing as a comic book emergency. Like when people would start to get a little too big for their britches, or when people were really starting to lose their shit over, oh my God, this book has got this and that. And it's like, listen, this is not the ER. We're not curing cancer here.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we want the
Entertainment.
books to come out. We need them to come out. It's commercial publishing. You got to ship it at some point. But yeah, at a certain point, like everybody calm down, like that's like, we're good. Like we'll fix this. It's fixable, whatever. Yeah. And it's the same with the rock star thing. I mean, yeah, probably who's the closest to a rock star we have? Neil Gaiman, maybe, I mean, it's
Right.
like, it's a weird thing in industry. Like the higher up the food chain you go, like a Jim Lee, right? Like Jim Lee should be like the Mick Jagger of comics in terms of just, he's been around, he's done everything, he's like the man, But if you meet, like, he's the night, I mean, yeah, he's a businessman. He can be cutthroat. He can be very, whatever, I'm sure. But he's also like the nicest, like most chilled out, friendly sort of person. And he never, like, I've gone and hung out with him when I have guys who are doing mini comics that, they print like in their basement, along with, Dave Gibbons and Brian Azzarello and Frank Miller, whoever. And it's like they all get treated kind of the same. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there really isn't a lot of huge egos in the industry. Um, and the people, like for myself, the people I have come across that want to operate like that, like it's generally like a one-off, and then I'm like, ugh, I don't want, who wants to deal with that stuff? I mean, you meet a guy like Jock who's like does it all now. He's writing, drawing, doing all this stuff. Like you're not going to meet a nicer, warmer, more fun kind of just, welcoming kind of person than that, which is not true of, like, say, the film industry, and I'm sure in
Oh my
some
God.
extent the music industry,
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, which was a huge change for me when I came over. I mean, I showed up the first day to work in a suit, and people just like mocked me at DC. They were like, yeah, they're like, lose the suit. Like, no one wears suits. And I was expecting a lot more of that kind of the yelling or the demanding stuff. And, I really, by and large, has been very limited, in my experience
Yeah.
over the years. But yeah, I mean, I had the benefit at the moment anyway of having put in so much time with all these people that I don't really, I don't have awkwardness about, like, asking for stuff or asking for changes and that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
I can't really say that I ever have, because, as I said, like, there's really so few people that you feel like you have to, defer to or worry about what they, their expectation, or worry about, oh, their handlers. Like, no, I mean, even in comics, like the funniest thing, like, I mean, I've always said this for years personally, like, I think my biggest skill is the kind of managing of the talent. So if there were more money in the business, like that's what I would do, right? Like I would probably just stop, um, because the daily grind of editing comics can really kind of wear on you. You know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
I feel lucky that I have the job, but the trafficking the pages and the reading the stuff and getting it here and hitting the dead, like if I could just kind of help creators, with their ideas and manage their schedules and kind of pick and choose their projects better or that sort of stuff,
Yeah.
like what would like a manager, like a business manager or music manager kind of thing would do. Um, I think I'd be really much, that would really like lean into my skill set, identifying new talent, breaking new talent, that sort of thing. But yeah, there just generally isn't like enough, money. Like, you're not talking about these $1 million contracts that you could take like a 10% share of and, live comfortably off it kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but because I do think, I think a lot of people in the industry would benefit from that for sure, because I do find there's a lot of people that have a hard time juggling all the stuff, all the commitments, getting the work done, but then also just navigating the waters of, kind of, okay, I'm going to do this project, but this is going to be the one that I leverage to do this or, whatever. Like I see so many people kind of, staying kind of where they are and not advancing, or they plateau at a certain point, and it's like but it's like they kind of making the same mistakes over and over, or just repeating the same work over and over and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like, and I feel like they probably could use somebody to just like a little bit of a guiding hand, or someone just even to kind of give advice to, but which I do, I feel like at this point I've earned the respect of like my peers, that they listen to me when I'm giving that kind of advice,
Yeah, 100%.
All right, let's take a quick break. What in the Sam Hill is happening right now? What is that?
Yeah, War Eagle.
You like bards?
Yeah, War Eagle.
Oh, you like Band of Bards. It's not my fault you mumbled. That makes sense. They're dropping some great new series right now. There's that one about a heavy metal guitarist in the 1970s with monsters, working class wizards. You know how we love monsters around here. And my friend Dakota Brown, he's working on a project, Grandma Tilly's Hell Tech Mech with Lane Lloyd. I saw the preview for that. That is crazy. Jimmy even contributed to their anthology From the Static and had Matt Sumo on the podcast to talk about his project, The Bardic Verses, which makes a lot of sense that the project landed there. Where can you find them? You need to get out more. They are in previews, or you can visit their website, bandabards.com, for all the latest. Can we turn the music off now? Thank you. No more surprises, minstrels, or anything like that, or I'll rent you out to the Ren Fair as a children's ride. Let's get back to the show.
I am curious about, with respect to distillery, because right now, it's big boys, girls, and non-binary folks who are up to the plate, if you will, and that makes perfect sense. I mean, as a new publisher and stuff. But I'm trying to get a feel for future, right? And is the design to kind of keep the top people, or is it going to be more of a thing where you're trying to break in some new stuff over time? I'm just kind of longitudinally, I'm trying to get an idea of what.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely more of the latter for sure. I mean,
okay.
The idea that you're establishing, expectations, you're, meeting whatever kind of commitments we've made to investors and everything else, and starting off with the biggest talent you can get and the biggest names you can get, certainly from a sales standpoint, is certainly helpful there. So, that's the early stage plans, but yeah, long term, there's definitely a sense of, I think one of the things that we've recognized, or I've recognized over the years, and Mark Doyle, my old associate at DC, runs IDW and stuff. He had talked for years, and really smartly so, like, industries like in the hip hop, rap, and, that kind of music industry, there's definitely that kind of mentor sort of bringing people along kind of thing that happens a lot, right? Like you bring in somebody to do like sing the hook on your song, and then you're producing their album, and then, just the fact that you put them on your record, then that's sort of, saying to the audience, like, hey, this person's like legit. I don't think comics has done a great job of that sort of thing. I mean, you do see it in certain, little clicks and things. But yeah, that was definitely, part of like the conversations early on, just about like what, once this initial batch of like heavy hitters kind of gets their turn at the plate, it only makes sense that you're going to then start casting a net that's a little wider. But then also, I think, the sense of like an incubator kind of thing, you know what I mean? Like where you're going to not just, I broke a lot of new talent at DC. Like if you go back and look at Vertigo over the years, like the people that I, gave kind of their first significant work to, whether it was like someone like Jock or Jason Aaron or other people like that. But there was also, though, you're sort of at a certain point, like they just kind of left them to sink or swim. I mean, not that I wasn't there to help them if they needed help, but at least the way the industry, particularly companies like Marvel and DC, it's like, well, then you're just dealing with other editors, you're in different departments, like you kind of sink or swim, based on that sort of thing. But I think, I think something where we're, bringing stuff in, bringing new people in, new ideas in, but also, really, again, like helping them kind of navigate, all the waters here and whatever. But I think, by establishing certain expectations, sales things early on, like, you have to have that foundation before you can really start to take flyers on a lot of other, I mean, it's hard enough to get retailers and stuff on board with, all this sort of A-listers, so it's like to turn around and be like, oh, we have this $9.99 book from a whole team of people you never heard of. Like your reputation will carry a certain amount of weight, but it only will get you so far. I mean, at a certain point, it's like a cash flow issue for people, right? So, but I mean, I think it's any long-term any publisher that would be hoping to be around for a long time, as these guys do. I mean, that has to be sort of part of your plan, right? I mean, you have to, and I feel like, at least for me personally, and I think that they share the same feeling. It's like, you kind of owe it. Like, I've had an amazing run. I've had an amazing life as a result. I've met like incredible people. I've done more, traveled more than I would have ever dreamt of, taking this job that I've got. So it's like, I feel like at a certain point, like you've got to go back and, try to, I don't know what like, without sounding totally corny about it, like, there has to be an aspect of your career or a certain amount of time you set aside in your day that you're giving some of that back to somebody, right? Like you have to be trying to find it's not all just sales and profits and all the rest of that kind of stuff. You have to sort of take on a more mentoring role. And I think you have to start to move aside to let other people in, right? I mean, I think we used to joke at DC, like the only way to get promoted at DC was if somebody died, basically, like it was the only way, which is a testament to, it is a cool job and people did love the jobs, and everybody who's in these jobs does it. A huge part of it is because you love it, the medium and the industry, not for the money. Like there's very, I don't know anybody that got into comics for the money, so to speak. So it's like, so I think a part of that too is like you have to be prepared, or should be prepared, or moving yourself into a position where you're opening that door for newer people, right? Like I think if you're going to evolve and change, like it can't just be the same people, like I still think of myself as kind of, it's, you still feel like you've kind of young, or you would, the way you'd look at older established people when you first started. But like, I've been that person now for a long time, even though if I don't feel that way myself. So it's like, you kind of owe it to the next group of people that, you're going to try to, maybe make it a little easier for them, or open a door for them, or, or even just get out of the way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I mean, is there a throttle control for you, at this point in your life? Is there, a personal threshold of like, okay, now I'm taking on too many things, if you will?
Yeah, and it's only been recently though that I've sort of been even trying to deal with that. I mean, one of the biggest things for me going to be I almost wish that, like, I wish there was like a work exchange program, that like when freelancers could come and work in the offices for a month and then you could go freelance for a month. Like when I was at Vertigo, like when I first left Vertigo, I was wishing that we'd had some kind of a work trade thing where, I could have got a sense of what it was like to be a freelancer for even a week or something, versus their expectation of what it was like. The amount of stuff that they never saw that I had to do and deal with on a daily basis at a place like Vertigo, I mean, the waters I had to navigate on a daily basis versus, the small amount of time that I had interacting with them as a freelancer. But then vice versa. It's like, it's very lonely, it's a lonely position. It's a very, difficult, and the idea that like you would say no to stuff it's tough. Like it really is hard to get to a point where you're saying no to things, and I
Yeah.
would say, I mean, I left DC in 2015, so I'm coming up, it still feels very recent to me, but like I'm coming up on 10 years now of like being out of, on my own. And it's really only been recently that I've, actively like had to turn stuff down. I mean, I've turned things down that just like they couldn't pay me or there was nothing, whatever. But like to turn stuff down that I would really want to work on, or that, that I've just had to say no to, just from purely from a time kind of bandwidth standpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really been recently, within maybe the last year, and and even that might be pushing it. It's hard, like I totally get it why all these freelancers end up overcommitting or saying yes, because you just never know, because you just get this fear that they're going to stop calling you, right? So
Yeah.
but then which is odd, because in terms of human nature, there's a lot of power in saying no, right? There's a lot of it's a difference between Veronica and Betty, right? I mean, Veronica treats Archie like crap and he keeps coming back for more, and Betty's always there, to help him, and and he neglects her, like I don't know, it's just human nature. But so
Yeah.
but it's tough in the moment to just be like, yeah, I don't think I want to do that, because I know I'm going to need more time, but yeah, I definitely, I feel like I have hit points where I'm overcommitted and I'm not living up to my own standards. Even, it's a bit like running like a restaurant. Like I feel like as long as the people out front like don't really notice it, then
Yeah.
that's ultimately okay.
Yep.
But I notice it internally, and I feel, it makes me feel bad that like there's definitely been times when I feel like I'm not phoning it in, but there's definitely, where I'm just feel like I'm not giving it the attention it deserves, probably. And even if you don't see it as a reader, or even if as a creator you don't see it, like it's my own internal clock. Like, and you know it, like you can sort of
Yes.
smell it when when that's the thing. So yeah, it is a challenge to try to figure out, how to do that. But again, it's like, yeah, even the business of like, oh, I wish I could manage talent. Like I wish I had a manager sometimes too.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's funny just to hear you talk about comics and so many parallels with the music industry. Even that statement, just talking about like if the reader doesn't know, it, that is music in a nutshell, because it's always a fiasco every single day. But as long as the 40,000 people on the other side don't really notice it, then your job is a
Hmm.
success. So
Yeah, right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, there's
exactly. And I think the danger is just getting to the point where you stop that sort of self-analysis, like, I mean, I
yeah.
think it's like you do the show and it's like you just feel like, like they'll eat whatever you put out for them. I think that's where the danger starts to come in, right? I think that's where the lack of quality, or when you see it in bands that just kind of like they're just phoning it in, it's like you just get to the point where it's like, what's the difference? Like they're happy, they didn't notice that like we messed up that stuff, or we didn't play that song, or what was the worst rendition of that tune ever. So I think you have to constantly be kind to, fight against that, because it's too easy to just say, okay, sure, like they'll buy it. What's the difference? Like we know people like jock stuff. It looks great. Like they'll buy it. Just get it out there.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That,
that's the thing that you're constantly fighting against.
that's the casino circuit in music, by the way. That is always the
Hmm.
marker, right? It's Smash Mouth or somebody else doing casino circuits. Don't ever get on those tours. That is the worst experience you could
Yeah,
possibly imagine.
I mean, I feel like even these residencies and stuff, it's just like some of the people I know have seen like even the U2 stuff have just been like, yeah, it's okay, like it's just, but it's like you just get the sense of, even the same in between every song patter is the same, it's not like there's nothing kind of, improvisational about it, or in that moment or that particular show. It's like they're really just kind of painting by numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like I don't want a residency at a Las Vegas casino, where I can just do the same album like every night.
Well, I mean,
So, and it's interesting because you would think that's the kind of case. Like, it's not always the case because even this is really in the weeds. But like a few years ago, they released that Elvis, like all those recordings of Elvis in Las Vegas, and he was
right.
literally doing 2 shows a night, of like the same material, like a dinner show and then like a midnight show. And the amount of like differences in the versions and the amount of differences in the patter with the audience and like just the energy levels and stuff, like in between not just daily shows, but 2 shows a day. Like
Yeah.
it's really like it was amazing. Like at a certain point, like you listen to the same song like 10 times, like you pick a song, you listen to them. And it's incredible to think that like, someone like an Elvis, I think people would probably, assume he's just kind of going through the motions or whatever. But like the dude must have really been like pretty driven because there's you hear so many differences in just the presentation and his energy levels and the sort of, in the moment comments and pitter patter with like the audience or with the singers and stuff. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, like that sort of stuff. That's a little in the weeds, but
No, I actually want to ask you about like a unique kind of project because I was talking to Ram about a week ago about the one hand and six fingers,
uh-huh.
um, which I thought was one heck of an ambitious idea. So, kind of what appealed to you about wanting to buy into that one?
Yeah, I mean, I never. It is ambitious, and it was like I. It's one of those things that when you hear the idea, you're like, how come there hasn't been more of this? I don't want to say like it's never happened before. Maybe it's happened before. If it hasn't, I'm not exactly sure where, or what I would point to per se. But yeah, it was just the idea of that sort of thing. Like it's just such an interesting thing, and just the challenge of working on 2 projects that are related, but also have to stand on their own. Is has definitely been like a challenge. I mean, because at first I was kind of like, well, I mean, some of it is just literally continuity kind of stuff that you need to kind of keep track of.
Yeah,
But then some of it is just more kind of tonally or directionally and that sort of thing. Um, and then it's even just the moving parts of like getting the books to come out in a certain sequence and all the rest. Yeah, and we even had big conversations recently about the collection. Like I hadn't really put a lot of thought into how it was being collected.
mhm,
And so yeah, we're trying, there's a lot of back and forth discussion about, what's the best way to collect them for the reading experience, but also from a sales standpoint and all the rest. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's pretty ambitious, and I mean, thankfully we've had a pretty long runway for it. So it's not the kind of thing that I would want to be doing on like really short notice. I mean, we've been working on it for a couple of years now. I would say, with like
yeah,
a lot of the issues in the can and everything. Um, but it's smart. I mean, Ram is like really. I mean, he's one of the smartest. I mean, people in the industry in terms of just managing his stuff and managing his career and the decisions he's made and things like that. And beyond just being super creative. And he's got a little bit of a team of the people who work with him on other books and stuff. So there's a coherent vibe to the 2 projects. Even though they're sort of you could read either one on its own and get like a really hopefully satisfying experience.
yeah. Well, this is my totally random question, so you'll have to forgive me here before we wrap up.
Okay.
In my former life, I was a professional landscape photographer. That's before
Okay.
lupus permanently shut the door for that.
Ooh.
Spent a lot of time in the Finger Lakes region, like teaching photography workshops, and my son has his sights actually set on Cornell. So, in an area known for its waterfalls and as kind of a native yourself, what's your favorite spot to get outside in the Finger Lakes region?
Oh, it's good. That's a good one because I worked all my teenage years in the New York State parks, up there. Like,
I didn't know
I
that.
grew, yeah.
Okay,
Well, I grew up in Ithaca, so I grew up in, so yeah, I worked at Treeman, I worked at Buttermilk. These are like all the parks around Ithaca.
awesome.
Um, yeah, so I spent a lot of time, outdoors. I mean, in that area, I mean, it's tricky. Like there's the biggies, like Watkins Glen is kind of the big, like you want the big bombastic, like Vegas kind of experience. And, Watkins Glen is like really like probably the one that most people point to. But yeah,
Yeah,
there's some really, really smaller ones like the Treeman has like a swimming hole where there's the waterfall that you can climb behind on the rocks, which is a nice little touch. And then there's a trail in Upper Buttermilk Falls that's like that was a kind of my personal favorite. My wife and I, when we first were married, living there, had a dog. Like that was the one. It's a lot of steps, and I don't know nowadays. I mean, I was a much younger man then, but like it's the trail that takes you from like Lower Buttermilk to Upper Buttermilk is just it's pool after pool of like this just crystal clear like cold water, and you're not supposed to swim in it, but of course everybody does.
Sure.
But yeah, I grew up my entire life like young life swimming in all the gorges and all the crazy stuff. Like we used to have those like to try to swim as early in the season as you can, so you'd go to like Ithaca Falls or other places and jump in and like the sort of polar bear club and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean it's like one of the most beautiful places I've been fortunate to travel all over, but it's anytime I'm back up there, I'm always just like, oh, this is incredible up here, like the hills and the vineyards and all the things. But those are a few.
It's amazing pocket of. I mean, I just love the area. My one fun story was driving one night, and there was a white deer right behind the fence, and it was just like ethereal and spooky, and that was before I knew about the white deer population that's there on the Armory. So
right.
that freaked my shit. That was wild.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy, but yeah, it is just amazing country up there. That's for sure. So, but yeah, I spent a lot of time as a kid and then working in all those parks, like like as a teenager.
That's really
great.
Cool.
Yeah, I was lucky.
Anything that's new that's dropping that you're personally working on, you want to give a little pitch to before we go?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to wrap up the first couple of DSTLRY series, like Gone 3 and Somna 3, like putting those to bed. So those first couple series are wrapped up, which is great. I mean, you mentioned the One Hand and the Six Fingers. I think Six Fingers #1 just came out today, right?
Yeah, this week.
It's
yeah,
out.
Wednesday.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, if people want to look into that, I mean, it's just those books are great. Dan Waters wrote that one, and working with Ram on the other one. Yeah, and then I think we've already announced like some of the next books in the DSTLRY wave. There's the Scott Snyder White Boat with Francesco Francavilla, worked from Batman and did Night of the Ghoul with me together, and then of course the Blood Brothers Mother, which is the Western that Azzarello and Eduardo Risso are doing, which just looks incredible. Like Brian and I yesterday, went over the first issue, like all the corrections on the first issue, the lettering, and just like every page we were just marveling at, like that, like what a master like Eduardo is at comic book storytelling.
Yeah.
Like the choices he makes and the things that he puts in and the things that he leaves out. Like it's just every page is like a master class. So yeah, and it's good that we both of us, the two of us, were like, this is just awesome. Like these pages are just so good. And then you can work with people you've worked with for 25 years and still see them pushing themselves to that, to do it at such a high level. I mean, that is definitely, makes me, get out of bed in the morning, like for sure. I feel very fortunate in that respect.
Well, where can people find you online? Do you even want them to find you online these days, right?
Do they want me to find? Did anyone find me online? Yeah, I mean, I do have a website that's mostly just kind of like stuff I've worked on and things. Bespokecomics.com, which is a little bit like cheekily named, but yeah, and I'm on Instagram. It's like ThrillyOD on Instagram if you want to see, but mostly it's just me. My other big hang up and my other big obsession is like always been like Warhammer, Games Workshop stuff.
Yeah.
So that's like my secret shame. So really my Instagram is mostly mostly posts of me, like, models that I've painted poorly, that sort of stuff. So, but yeah, that's the only one I'm on. I'm not on, I quit Twitter years ago. I don't,
good for you.
I'm on Facebook and, yeah, that was the best decision I ever made. I can't recommend it more highly. But yeah, so Instagram's the only one. I don't know, Instagram's okay. It seems like people are generally a little nicer, it feels like, and it doesn't feel quite as like toxic as those other ones felt,
Yeah.
But I try to limit the time as much as I can. No one wants to hear from this like old dude about, painting his 28 millimeter Space Marine.
Good on you. I don't.
So,
I'm almost 49, almost 50. I can't imagine like my eyes for hours sitting there with the brush and pulling that off these
I
days.
know. Believe me. Yeah, no, I know. I can't imagine either. But yeah, you just get like some magnifying glasses or whatever. Like that's about all I can do. And they're done to what you'd call like a table ready standard, not a,
Yeah.
you're not going to put them in anybody's case or put them up for a painting contest. But it is, I don't know, it's fun. It's definitely, I love all the lore and just the world of it and everything. And the community is a little toxic at times. I don't really deal with a lot of the, stuff. It's really just more of the hobby side of it. But it is kind of fun, particularly living in the Northeast, like it's like 15 degrees out now. So,
Yeah.
like last night, I definitely was like, yeah, I could just sit up here and putter around for an hour or two, listen to a podcast like yours, and it's all good. It's relaxing, something different, and it's not looking at a screen too. That's a big part of it for me. Is that it doesn't involve screens, which I appreciate.
Yeah, I can't do screens at night at all. I can't sleep afterwards. I feel like such an old man.
I can barely sleep. I've never slept like ever. Like even since I can't sleep, but my sleep habits are terrible. And I know everyone, sleep, you got to get sleep, whatever. But like they've always been terrible. So I don't worry about it so much. Like it isn't like a recent development that I would run to a doctor and say, it's just been like this since I was like a teenager, younger,
Yeah.
Even when I was a little kid, my parents used to let me stay up like after they went to bed, like just whatever, but it's just the way it is. But so, yeah, but yeah, it's fun. I think everyone should have hobbies,
Yeah. Are there still Games Workshop shops? Like
Yeah. There's
okay.
Still one in New York. I mean, in the city, it's on 8th Street. It's been there forever. And I'm up in Connecticut now, but like maybe 90 miles from the city or something. But yeah, there's one over here in like in West Hartford that you can go to. It's like maybe an hour and change. But so yeah, any excuse I can find. Yeah, even this weekend, I think we're taking a little trip like to the Berkshires for like a vacation, like a little like just a weekend thing. And I'm always I'm always looking at the Google Maps and like searching out, hobby shops in the area and stuff like that. Luckily, they mostly tend to turn out to be like, RV car hobby shops. So I don't have to go to them or drag my wife to them. But yeah, they're still, and anytime I go to Thought Bubble, like in the UK, which is a fantastic convention, one of the best conventions you can go to. But like the method to my madness is that in the UK, like there's a Games Workshop on every corner,
Right.
and it's like it's such a bigger part of the culture there that you can visit all these different ones. And so yeah, that's always a big part of any trip I take over there. So
planning around
little nerd action. Yeah, exactly. Go a day early and hit like 2 or 3 of them,
That's good. We all got to have our things.
Yeah, no, exactly. You got to have something. And it's tricky. I grew up loving comics, reading comics, and it's the one big downside to my whole career has been, when one of your passions like turns into your job, it's definitely like a minefield, I mean, I think people think it's like, oh, I want to turn my passion into a job, and it's cool, but it's also like it's a double-edged sword, for sure.
Probably know better than most. Like that was the music industry, and it bit me, and I did it, for 15 years, and I was in my mid 20s, and I saw the writing on the wall. Like all my friends who were 40, and it's just rough on the body. So I was like, I need an out. So dropped out of dropped out of music. Back double majored anthropology and environmental science, and the rest is history.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Sounds good. If you're happy, that's all that matters.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, happiness is one of those things you have to go find happiness. Like I don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining me today on the show. Best of luck with
Thanks for
DSTLRY
having me.
and future endeavors.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. Appreciate the time and for the invitation. It's nice of you.
Yeah. Well,
All
this
right,
is Byron.
cool.
This is Byron O'Neill on behalf of all of us at Comic Book Yeti. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.
This is Byron O'Neill, one of your hosts of the Cryptid Creator Corner, brought to you by Comic Book Yeti. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of our podcast. Please rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. It lets us know how we are doing, and more importantly, how we can improve. Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Cryptid Creator Corner, maybe you would enjoy our sister podcast, Into the Comics Cave. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.